for joining us. I'm Andrew Doyle. This is Douglas Murray, and together we are. No, that's not funny. We're here to talk about resisting wokeness, yeah, it's going to be a conversation rather than an interview. We're going to talk to each other about our approaches to this topic, and then we're going to come out to you guys, and you can come back to us with your comments, complaints, abuse, usual thing. So the reason why I thought it would be good for us to chat is that we've approached this in a very different way. So I've written a book, a satirical book, in the character of Titania McGrath to try and tackle and critique what we call wokeness. And Douglas, you've written a book as well, which is just out and available at all good bookshops. Do you want to tell us about it?
What a hard opening question. Thank you, Andrew. Very good to be with you, and a great pleasure to be at the Battle of Ideas. I should also say, perhaps at the opening, that I apologise for the extraordinary lack of diversity on the panel.
Yeah.
The heterosexual community isn't represented at all, so that needs working on.
Although people have said I'm a fake gay.
Oh yeah, oh that's one of my favourite allegations.
Yeah.
I actually know somebody who that allegation was made about, a young, very clever, slightly conservative figure who, when he was at university, at the National Union of Students, was denounced as a fake gay. They said that he was pretending to be gay in order to smuggle conservative politics in. And I said to him at the time, I said, there's some real commitment in there.
Yeah. I think if you're willing to do that, that's fair going.
Yeah,
that's good.
no, absolutely.
Because it is a lot of effort. It is exhausting. I mean, particularly the way I do it.
I'd heard.
Yeah.
Anyhow, but that proviso passed. Yes, you kindly ask. Yes, I wrote a book that came out last month, which looks at many of the same issues that you've been looking at. My book's called The Madness of Crowds, Gender, Race and Identity. And, oh, very kind. Gosh. And in essence, what I wanted to do was to run straight at all of the landmines of our time. And that's because I think we cannot live in a society so stupid that we can't talk about anything that matters for fear of offence. And I think there are two particular consequences from that. One is that we start to do very bad things because we pretend we know more than we do. We pretend to be much more certain than we have any right to be. And the second thing is that we end up living in this society which pretends we don't know things everyone knew till yesterday. And that if you combine these two things, you cover most of the social issues that are becoming hard and ugly. That's why I do them chapter by chapter: gay, women, race, trans. I'm sure there are other painful issues I haven't danced over, but those are the four that it struck me in recent years had become most weaponized, most impossible to talk about, that we'd made ourselves incapable of thinking about out loud. So yes, I decided to run at all of them, and also to explain why I think this has come about, why it should have been in our own lifetimes, in recent years, I think in the last decade, and then weaponized in the last 5 years, why we would have found this position to have sped up, why we're all bemused that the news and politics and much else keeps on having these same issues underneath it, so that the only point of political debate is to hope that you will find yourself in a studio with somebody who you can hope to dishonestly claim is being sexist or homophobic or racist or transphobic, and that should end up being the preoccupation of politics.
Yeah. I really hope that people read your book who are from the woke side. I mean, I really do, because I think it's an excellent book. It's very methodical and it's thorough, and I think you know, I think both you and I want people to reflect on what they're doing. You know,
yes, I mean, your approach mainly is to laugh at them.
Yes, which actually they don't like.
How amazing they don't have a sense of humour.
Yeah.
My approach is to laugh at them quite a bit, but also to take it deadly seriously, because these things is a movement that takes people out all the time.
Yeah.
you know, I was doing an event the other night with Lionel Shriver, and she made the very important point. She said, we're here doing this because a lot of other people aren't.
Yeah.
And I don't underestimate the difficulty for a lot of people in treading into this terrain, or the vindictiveness and the vituperation that comes their way should they find themselves accidentally or otherwise on top of one of these landmine issues. So I try to explain where I think it's come from, why it's been particularly something of the last decade, to try to take it apart, to show that it doesn't work on its own estimation of itself. That is, that even if we all tried to get in line with the claims that are being made, it still couldn't work, because it's totally self-contradictory. So that's the first thing. But the
You know, as Douglas is being asked about his book, The Madness of Crowds, and what he's talking about in terms of, you know, wokeness behind these movements. And he talks about, I would basically say, you know, the crowds that are behind the gay movement, the crowds that are behind the trans movement, the crowds that are behind the race movement, the crowds that are behind the women's movement. And those are things that he's talking about. I would also add that there are huge crowds also, crowds behind the culture movement, the climate eco-terrorism movement, crowds behind the sports movement, crowds behind the culture movement, crowds behind, you know, the academic institutions. All of those are out there. I know Douglas is focusing on the four, but I think there are so many other crowds that are behind different, you know, avenues of wokeness. And that highway, it's not just a 2-lane highway. It's not a 4-lane highway. It is a massive, huge highway that, you know what? More highway keeps getting added to it. More lanes keep getting added to it. And when we tell people to stay in their lanes, these lanes are not staying separate. They're all coming together all at the same time, crashing into one another. And what are we being told? That a one-size thing fits all. Attack everybody who raises it up. Everybody bands together. So somebody attacks the transgenderism. Guess what? You've got the crowds from the, you know, from the race people, from gender people. You've got the crowds that are from the gay side, the crowds from the feminist side, the crowds from everything, all gang up and coming after. And as Douglas said, that is important for, you know, him and others to speak up because of the lack of other people that are stepping up, that are not stepping up to talk about this because they're afraid for themselves, afraid what it's going to do to their career, afraid what it's going to do to their job, afraid what it's going to do in terms of a Twitter war or whatever. You know what? So he says, at least there's someone out there, but there's more than just people like, you know, Douglas out there fighting. This gentleman is out there. You've got so many people on the conservative side. And there are a lot of people that I wouldn't even call them conservatives, but they're out there fighting because they know in their heart of hearts that a lot of things that are going on are just plain wrong. And they talk about it. They step up to the plate. They're not hitting the softball. They're hitting that fastball that's coming high and tight at them. And they're doing all that they can. I know you guys out there that are listening to this, those on the conservative side, you're doing it every day. You're talking the talk and you're walking the walk. And that's what we have on tap for you today, folks. More of Douglas Murray being interviewed about his book, Madness in Crowds. We're going to get to that in the next few seconds. But before you do, you're watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasir, where I give you my political prescription from my political perspective on what happens when Douglas Murray meets the wokeness of crowds, meets the transgenders, meets the gays, meets women issues, meets all these things. They always come colliding together. Science, biology, culture, women, everything. Let's get back to the interview right now.
For God's sake, don't let's spend any of our lives doing this.
Yeah.
This is not a fair representation of a society. It's not a fair interpretation of a society. And it's not a fair estimation of ourselves as human beings. Because we are not just black or white, straight or gay, or a man or a woman. It's an unfair estimation of our own experience as human beings.
It's also hugely degrading. I mean, we saw this the other day when Barack Obama made the point that we need to. He was asking for nuance, wasn't he? He was saying, you know, humanity is messy. People make mistakes, and this expectation from the woke crowd that there has to be ideological purity and that you should rake over things that people have said. And then in response to that, he's been labelled as anti-woke and a boomer.
A boomer, that's right. He's old.
He's old.
He made the fundamental mistake of aging.
Yeah.
And none of his critics will ever find themselves in this unfortunate position, I know.
No.
That's right, the New York Times said this was just a boomer view. It just goes to show there's absolutely nothing. You know, you can be the first black president.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. You got old.
Yeah, but also...
Deal with it.
He's also, let's not forget, he's half white, and that's the problematic part.
Right.
That's where it comes from.
On occasion, this is the way to do him down as well.
I did wonder whether that would happen, where people would start calling him half white, and you know, I mean, it's a really depressing. I wonder where this has come from, and I think I sort of blame academia a little bit. You know, this thing that you were talking.
Why a little bit?
Well. So, I mean, if you go back to the sort of the Foucauldian stuff that was really popular back in the 80s and 90s, and there was a book by someone called Kate Millett called Sexual Politics, which was effectively just trawling through all the classics and sort of saying, this is sexist, that's homophobic, etc., problematizing literature. And that now seems to be a mainstream tactic. It's what you describe when people come into interviews and all they're trying to do is work out where you're being sexist and this is... And when you do that to literature and art, that is a form of, I think it's a form of cultural vandalism. If all you can do is look for whether something is sending the right popular message, then what good are you?
Again, I mean, it's a form of incredibly proactive laziness, isn't it? Because if all of these texts from the past are not worth reading because they've made an error or the author is of the wrong type, then you don't need to contend with them.
Yeah.
You don't actually need to read. I realized this in a sort of astounding revelation I had recently when a young student said to me that he thought that Immanuel Kant had used the N-word. And I said, I don't think he did. At least it doesn't seem likely to me. Now, it's possible, I've got to look into this, it's possible that he...
But if he had, what would that mean? That we should therefore disregard the categorical imperative?
What I realised was, of course, that it meant that this young man had no need to read Immanuel Kant,
right.
Which is really useful because he's difficult. You go,
Do you know, I saw that, so you know this Dana Schwartz, a novelist based in America, she tweeted the other day, she published an article saying why we need to destroy the Western canon.
Yeah,
she was saying,
by her book.
But by her book, it was tagged to her book. And she was saying, you know, we need to get, because it's all white and male and therefore racist and patriarchal. And it does strike me as this kind of crabs in a bucket idea. It's people who aren't very good. You know, she's not a good writer, but she can now say, but don't read Hemingway. Right. She doesn't have to compete with that. Yes. She, you know, because, you know, so she can bring everyone down to her level. You know,
it's also the whole thing is so reductive and offensive on its own terms. I mean, one of the things I mentioned at one point in the Madness of Crowds is this whole thing of studies. I mean, to a great extent, as we all know, anything with studies in the title should not be taught, or at least shouldn't be funded by a taxpayer. And studies, however, did have a point at one stage. You could argue there are some that might have a point in the future, but the way in which black studies started, for instance, was plausibly, reasonably enough, an attempt to highlight writers and other figures who may not have had enough attention and who needed to be brought out from some obscurity that through circumstance in the past they found themselves in. The same thing with gay studies to some extent, although it's quite hard now to pretend that there aren't very many well-known gay writers from history. But these things had you could argue they had a utility. Where does it go wrong? It goes wrong very clearly when you get into whiteness studies, because then whiteness studies is the only one that is intent on problematizing, not on getting people out of history to try to highlight them and study them and reflect on them, but rather just to beat down on everyone who happens to have a particular skin pigmentation. Well, here's the problem, among others, from this, is that no reasonable humane person wants any minority writer to be stuck in that silo. Right? Who wants James... If you said, James Baldwin, he's one of my favourite black writers. No. James Baldwin, one of my favourite writers. That works. That works.
I totally agree. I used to get annoyed by being called a gay comic. I thought, what, like, I mean,
That is quite annoying.
You know, that is so true about the woke crowd and about the virtue signaling crowd and the elitists. They want everything to be highlighted. Every single thing. You know, your features, your phenotype, your genotype, your DNA structure, your molecular structure. Where are you in terms of your sexual structure? I mean, everything needs to be done. Your color structure. So as Douglas just said there, you know, he's my favorite black writer. Why? What do you mean he's my favorite? If you say he's my favorite white writer, oh my goodness, you will be Twitterized to the ends of the earth. But if you said he's my favorite, you know, Afro-Indian, Polynesian, you know, secularist, atheist writer, you're going to get claps. Yes, thank you. Thank you for identifying each and every one of his identifiers, his modifiers, so that everybody knows on the intersectionality list that this guy is absolutely great, because the more intersectionalities you have, the more you can basically say, you know, you can throw the oppressive card on each and every single one of them. And so, like he said there, he hates being called the gay comic. What does that have to do with that? And doesn't, I mean, unless he's saying he's using the word gay, meaning that he's the funny, ha-ha, happy comic, as opposed to what? A non-happy, non-laughing comic? In what way are you using the word gay? And I hope everybody understands that I'm being, you know, facetious about this. But there is an implication as to the gay comic, the black comic, the Jewish comic. Now, a lot of times, there's a difference in how you use it. If you're using it to describe someone in terms of where their major body of work might be, so if somebody comes in there and says, the Jewish comic, he may have a Jewish ethnicity. Maybe a lot of his jokes come from the fact that he is Jewish, has Jewish stories and has, you know, that Jewish background to fall back on. But isn't that what everybody does? But why not just allow them to be? So he's the Black history professor. Is he only teaching Black history? Or is he just happens to be a history teacher whose skin pigment happens to be black? And how do you know that there's no white in there? How do you know that there's no Caribbean in there, that there's no Jamaican in there, that there's no Middle Eastern in there, that there's no African in there? It could be black, but American black. Doesn't have to be African black. I mean, this could go on and on and on. You could play this game. But that's exactly what the left does. The progressives, the academics in Hollywood, the alphabet networks, they want to use this thing because they use identity politics every single time for everything. And on top of that, playing their identity politics card in the oppression Olympics. Oh, now you've got a whole different ballgame going on. Anyways, folks, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I've been your host. My name is Dr. Nasir. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to our channel, like, share, and follow us. You all know what to do. Take a look at our other video links above and below. Share your comments. Put them down in the comment section. We'd love to hear from you. My final thought is always, when you're right, you're right. And when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.